Welcome one, welcome all, welcome to another exciting episode of Tales of Citizens. I am Bridger. I will be your host for today, where we are talking all about competitive gaming. That's right, today we are dredging back into the depths of our memories to talk about days gone by. How about these acronyms? OGL, STA, CAL, CPL. If you recognize those, you might just be an old-ass competitive gamer. Again, I am Bridger. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about competitive gaming and what it has to do with Star Citizen and what we expect from Star Citizen from a competitive gaming aspect. Today, I would like to welcome on the show for the first time in a long time our good friend Tim Young, an astrophysicist from Australia. Welcome, sir.
Welcome and good day.
And I'd like to thank you for coming all the way to the studio. Oh, wait, I can't pull that off because it's very clear that you have Australian internet.
Yeah. This is the problem when you're transmitting from the future back into the past. It gets a little bit wobbly.
Aha. That would do it. Okay, also joining us, as usual, we have our good friend Gray from Team Legacy. Welcome, sir.
How's it going?
Not bad, not bad. So before we jump into our Star Citizen discussion, we'd like to talk a little bit about what we've been doing recently on the web, on the gaming in general, or anything to do with Star Citizen directly. Myself, I've been playing around with a Track IR, which is the first time I've got to play around with it just recently, and it is really interesting and headache-inducing. I don't know if I have to tweak some settings, but after playing War Thunder for a little bit, my mind was like, listen, wait, you twist your head a little bit and the screen goes whew, I was like, okay, I need to stop for a while. But
that may just be War Thunder.
It might just be War Thunder that did that, yes. It was really cool, and it's nice to have it. I'm hoping that we can utilize it in Star Citizen when it first comes out. I'm sure it'll be available eventually, but I don't know if it's going to be in this first iteration. So, what have you guys been up to recently? Gray, anything good?
Not a whole lot on my end here. Honestly, the gaming world has been a little quiet for me in the last couple of weeks, aside from just watching CIG's announcements. PlanetSide 2 finally did put in the straight pull bolts for sniper rifles, which means that you never have to leave the comfort of staring at somebody's head. But other than that, not a whole lot new and exciting.
All right, Tim, I assume not much is exciting on your end either?
No, I mean, mostly work, research, the usual. Been revisiting a lot of old games, went back to KSP for a good while. Been playing a lot of Pokemon.
Now, I understand you were talking to me before we began the show, and I understand that you had some problems with one of the recent guides from May 6th on the Robert Space Industries website. Would you like to elaborate on that? My understanding is it's... I think it's time for a science rant.
Look, people could argue that I have problems with nearly everything, and that's probably a very easy argument to make. I mean, I'm fussy, is what it comes down to. But I want to preface this rant by saying that I get they're trying. And I totally appreciate that. Creating a whole universe is not a simple and easy thing, and all the stuff that they've been bringing out in the past 2 years has just been absolutely phenomenal. Like, I'm always thoroughly impressed by everything that they've been doing. However, every now and then they release a galactic guide, like the Pyro Galactic Guide, that it really eats at my inner core, because there is just so much wrong with what is going on in this whole system. The first thing, let's not even talk about the whole concept of coreless worlds, and then those coreless worlds also being a great place to find rare metals like palladium and cadmium, because the very concept of a coreless world is that it doesn't have a metallic core, which means that there is a lower metallicity going on in the first place, which means it's probably an early iteration star, because early iteration stars produce low metallicity planets if they're actually create planets at all. But not only that, the fact that, there was somewhere else in there that we have algae-like fossils, where we don't, that's one of the properties of algae, is that they don't produce fossils. There's nothing to fossilize over. If you want to have something cool going on there is so much cool happening in science in this area. You could have talked about stromatolites. Stromatolites are amazing. The oldest forms of life on this planet, on the real planet Earth, are stromatolites, found right here in Australia. And they are produced by cyanobacteria. We're talking about single-celled and multi-celled cyanobacteria that are capable of producing gigantic structures that still last today, almost 3 billion years later. I mean, that is absolutely freaking phenomenal. 3 billion years later, and they're still alive. They're still these huge structures. Don't talk about algae bacteria. Talk about the real things that are inside. There's so many awesome things out there. Don't start... I get, maybe people didn't know this. Maybe people don't realize that algae can't produce bacteria. I get that. I understand that. But a small amount of Googling or Wikipedia here could be... And the other thing, and I don't remember which... maybe it was the Pyro system, maybe it was one of the other systems. These things get lost in my red cloud of rage. But there was one that was talking about arcing of these... between asteroids, there were these arcs that were coming out. First of all, that would imply that the asteroids had some huge capacitance capability, which is just not feasible in a system that is stable over a period of time that is longer than, let's say, a minute. And I'm going to hope these systems last for more than a minute, otherwise you have to be really lucky to get there. But let's assume that the capacitance works and they do actually able to store up some huge amounts of electric charge that can somehow permeate the free space of vacuum, which, I mean, let's not even talk about the voltages that are required for that. But the fact that the arcs are in space, in a vacuum, which means you can't see them. You won't get lightning. The whole point of lightning is that it's finding the smallest mean free path between molecules of oxygen in the atmosphere. You have to have an atmosphere for it to pass through. Do you know what happens when you pass an electric current through a vacuum? Nothing. You get a cathode ray tube. If you break open a TV tube and turn that on, that's what you get. You get a beam of electrons, invisible, completely invisible, going in a perfectly straight line from one point to another. So if you did go into this asteroid system with its magical capacitance, you wouldn't see anything. All you would see is asteroids. And then you would walk through them or you would fly through them and nothing would happen. Absolutely nothing would happen. If you want to have electricity in space, I get that. That's cool. I want to fly through electricity in space as well. We're going to have to make up a whole new set of physics to make that happen, but at least try and make it happen in a somewhat realistic way. Don't just say, oh yeah, these asteroids that have awesome capacitance that can just charge off lightning. No!
I have a feeling if I don't stop you now...
that is cool out there.
I have a feeling that if I don't stop you now, then we will just be here all night. The science rant. The science rant, ladies and gentlemen. I found the one you're talking about. Odin. The Odin system had the one where they talked about
that's right. Oh man, there was so much else wrong with the Odin system as well.
Oh, you're getting them started again, Bridger.
Oh no. Oh no. Let's jump off target. All right. What else has been going on recently? Well,
new ship stats.
New ship stats, exactly. That's what's been going on. So we've been taking a look at that. Somebody on the subreddit, I'll see if I can find it here, was trying to point out to put into perspective just how big the Banu Merchantman is. Did you guys see this? I'll pull it up right here.
Yes.
It is a big baby.
Here it is. Just to put it in perspective, this is how big the Banu Merchantman is. We just scroll around. How many is that? That's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 freelancers worth of holds. That's pretty big. So
that's what they really should have made the caterpillar look like right there.
Yeah, right? There was also the new multi-org thing since we talked last, and there's been a lot of discussion about that. I don't think there's anything that we really need to cover other than the stuff that was on there.
It exists.
It exists. The ramifications of that will become apparent to most organizations in due time. And we will move right on to Cosmos. While Tim is on here, can we nerd out over Cosmos? Because I've been watching that a lot recently, and it's awesome. This is a Star Citizen podcast. I can't do it. Maybe we'll talk about it later. Anyway, let's jump into the next segment, which is, in fact, another kind of rant. It's not about science. It's about what grinds my gears. You see, when I get frustrated by something that I read, it gets me a little angry. When I get a little angry, I've got to vent. And when I vent, it's called a Bridger rant. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, today I'm here to talk to you about something that is near and dear to my heart, and the light that was opened upon me so many years ago, I hope I can now open upon you. So, there is a type of gamer that is known in the wider world of gaming as a scrub. He will not know that he is a scrub, and if you call him a scrub, he will deny it, but he is a scrub nonetheless. And the definition of a scrub is thus: someone who thinks they're playing by the rules of the game, but who is in fact not playing by the rules of the game. They're playing by made-up rules in their own mind about ethics and morals when those have nothing to do with the rules of the game. Here's a definition, here's an example. I'm playing League of Legends the other day, right? And this guy on our team is playing mid, and for those of you that have no idea what League of Legends is, it's very simple. The guy overextends. He leaves the safety of his team's shelter, goes too far into the enemy side, and is constantly ganged up on by more than one of their team. It's called getting ganked. And that is clearly something he shouldn't be doing. And then he goes and blames the other team for playing a cheap character. A no-skill character. That is not the way towards bettering yourself, ladies and gentlemen. If you have an issue with the game, and your first instinct is to immediately blame the game, or the other players even, that's a mistake, that's a problem. When you're talking about trying to be a better gamer, trying to be a competitive gamer, what you need to realize is that the first person you should blame is yourself. Even if it's not your fault, blame yourself anyway. Examine ways you could have done things better. That's how you'll get better. Now, let's go a little deeper into the scrub here, because the scrub is someone who thinks that, well, this part of the game is the part where the game is really skillful. In an RTS, a real-time strategy game, a scrub will say, "Oh man, you rushed me in 5 minutes. That's no skill, you cheater, loser, cheesy, cheap, nonsense, no skill player." All they're doing is defining the rules of the game to say you shouldn't attack before 10 minutes. That's in their own head. They've made up that own special rule. That rule doesn't exist, but they expect everyone else in the game to abide by their specific chosen rule. That's the problem. Nobody else knows about the rules you've made up in your head, dude, and they can't follow them if they don't know them. And even if they do know them, they're not obligated to follow them because the game enforces the rules, and it's hard-coded into, well, the code. So, really, that's what it comes down to. The next time you're thinking about bitching at a player for using a cheap, either tactic, character, weapon, ability, what have you, think again. You can call the character broken or unbalanced. That's fine. But don't blame the player, man. Blame the game. That's what it comes down to. Tales of Bronze.
Fair enough.
So that just makes me angry. And for those of you that want more reading on this topic, I've got a website for you. It's serlin.net/PTW, serlin.net/play to win. He wrote a book on this very subject. serlin.net/PTW. I actually own the physical copy of this book, but he goes into great detail from a fighting games perspective, but also other games perspective on how far you should go to win and what you should do, what kind of mindset you need to have to play competitively. He was David Serlin was a competitive Street Fighter player back in the day, and he used a lot of his skill and the psychology that he learned to put together this excellent guide. If you don't have time to read through the whole book, there are a series of small articles, and they're linked at the bottom of that page. Playing to Win Part 1, 2, and 3, and those are very good as well. I highly recommend them if you, too, get enraged by people who blame you for using a good character. All right, let's jump into our discussion on Star Citizen, shall we? So, today we are talking all about competitive play. So, Tim, let's go around the table here, collectively, as it were, and discuss our history with competitive play. What have you been involved in the past, Tim?
I mean, competitively, on a national level, we played TF2 for quite some time, Team Fortress 2, which was, I think, a really, really interesting game for competitive play because it's one of the few games that is not maybe properly, but certainly it's a pseudo-asymmetric game style.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that you have vastly, vastly different classes between, for example, the medic and the engineer and the scout, the spy, etc. You have some pretty interestingly defined roles, but more interesting was the fact that you have more roles than there are people available on the team. And that's something that I find really, really interesting. I mean, I think the most interesting thing about competitive play is when you have highly asymmetric and asynchronous play, because that allows for the most amount of sort of variation in tactics and variation in how you approach showing the game as well. We also played competitively Counterstrike for a while, although I will admit I was certainly not, I believe the term is the anchor of the team.
Not the anchor, you're saying.
No, I was the anchor. No,
Oh.
by far, I was the guy that ran out to sort of flush out the snipers, sort of thing.
Oh,
The sacrificial.
that's how you
sacrificial
define
lamb.
anchor. I see.
No, the guy holding it back. The ship's trying to sail, man. The ship's trying to sail, but the anchor's holding it back. I also played Age of Empires 2 competitively for a while, which goes way back.
Oh, it does.
And the other game I played competitively was World in Conflict, which
Ooh.
was one of the most amazing games for competitive play because it actually had a built-in spectator, like, camera mode, where you had views and angles that were completely unavailable to players. They were only available to this one specific mode. So you could have nice big sweeping pans, you could have sort of instant jump between points, and it was a fantastic game for watching competitive play.
Yeah, I think World in Conflict was a very underappreciated game, I feel.
Oh, so
it
much.
had a really solid game mode. The one where you would get when you lost units, you'd get the money back. You could buy new units and go in. So it didn't have the same slippery slope mechanics that so many of the RTS games do. I really liked it for that. But
Yeah,
so
completely took out the whole resource management side of things and just
Yeah.
instead let you focus on small squads of sort of specialized troops.
I really appreciate that for what it was. Gray, what about you? Have you played any considerable amount of competitive gaming in the past?
Actually, the one that really caught my attention and kept me for a while was the original StarCraft. I spent years climbing that ladder. Never really did make it to a point where I wanted to go play in a tournament somewhere and spend the money or deal with that whole situation. But I was up, high enough in the ELO that I could have at one point. Just not really where I wanted to go. It was fun, and the important part was it actually kept you against opponents that were, how shall we say, challenging. Beyond that, competitive gaming, I played some Arena in WoW. I'm not sure how much you want to call that competitive, but
I think that
certainly
qualified.
had
Yeah.
the elements of the team play and that kind of thing. I got a little disgusted with that, largely because of matchmaking, but I'll get back to that later in this discussion, and ELO gain for that matter. And actually spent quite a bit of time in competitive battlegrounds in WoW back in the day before you couldn't get the original ranks, disabled all that in Wrath of the Lich King. Did the High Warlord grind with some friends on that one and got a few people boosted up into those spots. So I tended to play the support roles rather than the guy who was personally trying to climb those ladders, but I really did enjoy playing on those teams.
All right, for my own credentials, I need to bring out my inner geezer. Hey, back in my day, we had leagues run by the players. Yeah, STA and OGL. Those were the days when things were, well, they were terrible, but let's pretend they were good. Yeah, I played Quake World Team Fortress. That was the original Team Fortress way back in 1998, and I played, Day of Defeat I played competitively, and Battlefield 1942, and Counterstrike. Like, I played all of those first-person shooters pretty competitively, and that's sort of my pedigree. I think the most recent one I played on a competitive level, though, was Call of Duty 1 and 2, back when they were actually good games. So, let's talk about the different types of competitive leagues and tournaments out there, because there's actually quite a few different types. I mean, you've got player-run tournaments like I was talking about, which have almost disappeared at this point, as in terms of not-for-profit tournaments. Things like STA, OGL, CPL. Actually, well, CPL was the professional league, but CAL was run by the players for the players. CEVO still seems to be around, and the TWL, the Warfare League, something like that. Those ones are still around. I think those are the only two that I could find, actually. Cal died a long time ago, which was disappointing. So you've got those player-run ones. Then you've got developer-run competitive play, which is more recent and much more interesting now because they have the only... I guess the example of that would be League of Legends, right? Riot is having their big tournaments, the League Championship Series, the LCS. And then you have professional third parties like Major League Gaming and what used to be the World Series of Video Games and the CPL back in the day. Those were sort of for-profit tournament scenes. So what do you think are the pros and cons of those different types of competitive play? Gray?
Well, I mean, obviously the not-for-profit player tournaments had a real appeal to them. It created a stronger community. You had a lot more people that genuinely cared about setting these things up, and as anyone is aware who's ever run any sort of organization, it's a lot of work. The people who rose to that challenge were genuinely people who cared about the game most of the time, and I don't want to blanket that entire thing out because I'm sure there were a couple of jackasses.
Along that same vein, I think they were also more knowledgeable about the intricacies of the competitive scene at the time, so they could set up the rules better than the others.
Absolutely, and I think actually when you start looking at when WoW set up their first arena system, you saw the loss of those knowledgeable players really harming the competitive scene. It took WoW a long time to figure out even how to make an ELO system, where I think a lot of these players that had created these not-for-profit setups really could have done a lot to help these things, and they just didn't get hired to do it. Beyond that, I do think that the newer model that we're seeing of paid tournaments, sponsored tournaments, do have their perks. It's allowing some people to actually sort of live as gamers, which is kind of a cool professional sport thing. See the air quotes there, but at the same time, it's admirable that we've actually gotten to a point where tournaments matter enough that someone can make a living off of them. And then, of course, you've got all the in-game systems where they just want to give a ladder so people have a treadmill to run on. But
are those kind of a cop-out half the time? I mean,
3/4 of the time, really. For the top maybe 10% of players, that can be a very valuable resource, particularly when they're trying to find out, hey, who should we pair into our competitive team that we want to go to paid tournaments with? Beyond that, it's just another grind. It's just another way to say, hey, can you possibly get this new piece of gear?
So it sounds like you're saying sort of the pros and cons. The player-run ones can be the sort of player-run not-for-profit like CEVO, OGL, STA, CAL. Those ones have the advantages of being very knowledgeable, so they get set up correctly. But I think the disadvantages of those are that because the labor is all mostly volunteer, sometimes you just would have admins that would have some real-life stuff happen, and the league would just fall apart because there was only one or two guys running it.
And, I mean, yeah, you're right. That's definitely the main disadvantage of anything that's player-run. It's not going to be as stable as something that has paid employees behind it. Plain and simple.
All right, so Tim, is the developer-run competition the way to go then? Is like we've got Riot doing it, but I think, the Smite developers are having their own little tournaments and things like that as well. It's very popular in the MOBA-style game scene.
Yes, I think so, but you need to have the right people at the helm, I guess, is the key there. You need to have people who are, first of all, sort of aware of how the system needs to be run, but also people who are invested in the competitive scene being something that people enjoy, not just something that people sign up to. When you start looking at it in terms of KPIs, like if you're looking at it in terms of key performance indicators, and you're just sort of getting, it's numbers on board, that's when things start to become a little bit stale and a little bit sort of weirdly sterile. So we see that in a lot of games where you've got developer-run competitions where everything is a little bit too clean, everything's a little bit too, I'm not going to say ordered, but it doesn't feel natural, if you know what I mean. Whereas when you had the player-run ones, there was, it was a little bit dirtier, but in kind of a good way. So you had, hiccups in the system, sure, but you also had some unique and dynamic stuff that was coming out of it that felt like it was natural.
Sorry, I'm trying to clarify. Yeah, I know we're talking about League of Legends stuff, but this is going to tie back into Star Citizen. Hang on. Make the journey with us. Make the journey with us. It just occurred to me there's a really interesting comparison between the rise and fall of competitive gaming seen as being really important to a game's survival and, let's say, hardcore rating in an MMO. So follow me on this one. So back in the day, let's say early 2000s, if you had a shooter that did not have support for like private servers and a tournament mode and admin controls and modability to allow for a competitive scene, it was seen as a failure by the community and by the industry. And it seems to me... Go ahead.
Butt in on that. That's still the case for most titles. If you watched what happened with Tribes Ascend, they lost a huge portion of their competitive scene because they didn't have private servers for years after the launch. I think that you can continue where you're going, but I think with the majority of titles, you just don't have the ability to ignore that, even now.
I would say that Tribes Ascend would be an anomaly specifically because it catered specifically to the hardcore competitive gamer that remembered the Tribes scene. But let's see if I can pull this together. So, I would suggest, though, that since then we have seen the especially since the great flight to the consoles that all the publishers took at the once Call of Duty 4 made it big on the Xbox and everybody started going over there with their first-person shooters. That scene had a lot more casual players that weren't into the same competitive like get together and practice as a team and then have matches every week in this league, et cetera, et cetera. So that brings us to a time like with Titanfall where you don't even get private servers until after the game launches, and you have Battlefield 4 that came out without enough support that they wanted and things like that. And I kind of feel like the industry realized, well, okay, we thought the competitive community was really important for a long time, but it was because they were like the vocal minority. They were the ones that were garnering, continuation of play and continuing people to talk about it. So that's why it's still important. But I think a lot of them have said, we can be successful without them. Screw it. And kind of launch stuff and add it later. And that sort of seems to be the trend in MMOs as well, if you ask me, because you have... like, isn't the percentage people keep throwing around, the rating, the hardcore raters in WoW have always only been about 10%. Now it might be larger, but back in the day, when WoW was in its heyday, I guess you could argue it still is, that, the hardcore raters are only about 10% of the audience, and they were always specifically, trying to build things for those hardcore raiders. And then you have Guild Wars 2 come out, which seems to be built for a much more casual group. They say we don't have any hardcore rating. So they're kind of saying we don't need that 10% to get what we want. I don't know if that metaphor holds together. It just occurred to me that analogy kind of feels like the same rise and fall of the hardcore 10% getting ignored for the greater masses and quote-unquote dumbing down the game.
No, I think the analogy definitely holds. I mean, I was personally very disappointed when Guild Wars 2 had no serious, like, hardcore content. I mean, the closest thing you got was kind of like the final dungeon in Ara. And then even then, Paths 1 to Path 4 of Ara was not exactly hardcore. I mean, it was hard, but you kind of just followed a guide to get from one end to the other. I mean, there was nothing particularly sort of interesting, I thought, about it. It was very sort of make or break based on a couple of key moments in it, and that was kind of it. There was nothing that you really needed to practice for. There were no specific sort of mechanics or functions in the dungeon that made you feel like, yeah, we should practice this particular strategy or get good at doing this one particular thing, or have a group that's geared this specific way.
Okay.
And I thought it was really sad.
So now that I've taken us completely off the rails, let's pull us back to Star Citizen. Now, we talked about you got player run, developer run, and sort of professional third party what would work best for Star Citizen, do you think, Gray? Which one of these is the best option?
You know, as much as I really hate to say this, they need a ladder. People are going to really want to know how they stack up. So there's going to have to be the in-game developer-oriented one that's already set to go. The real question is going to be specific to when you're talking player run. Do we want player run tournaments to be focused on private server style arena matches? Or is this an opportunity for player run tournaments to be out in the wide universe? Is this an opportunity for, so to speak, world tournaments?
Well, to some degree, I kind of feel like a ladder is the casual person's competitive mode to some degree. They like to see that they're getting better. I mean, that's kind of what I like about the way that League has put in their new the division system and stuff. That's kind of a fun way to track your progress. Or an ELO, even when it was ELO, you could still see your ELO going up and down, and you could try to get better. So I think that's a nice thing to have regardless. But support for official, organized teams, dueling it out to try and see who's the best, I think that should be a separate and important piece to it.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think RSI should definitely try to make sure that they are making official arena-style tournaments. They're using the Arena Commander module and the Arena Commander style, if they can polish it well, to say, hey, if this can balance out well, if this can create good combat, let's make more maps. Let's make more content. Let's make people go in as teams. I think that they could do some really cool things with that. Have people win ship skins in game for doing awesome things, or a variety of other options. And for that matter, competitive in Star Citizen could also mean things like the racing circuit, which, when that comes down, it's going to end up having to be RSI's thing to deal with. It's going to require some human interaction to make the racing scene function.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting, because how do you not just win if you have the biggest thruster and the smallest profile? Like, you've got to provide, it's got to be some kind of an obstacle course, right?
And where's the point where it's okay or not okay to blow somebody up? Who's judging these sorts of things? Yeah, they're going to have people out there to watch these races and probably make some of the races official. Make them a big thing a few times a year, or whatever it ends up being, once a month. They'll probably have to hire people to do it.
Yep. So
I think what we've heard so far from CIG is that that's totally in the books. I mean,
yeah,
that looks like what they're planning to do. So, which is great. I mean, first of all, that's amazing. But they've already stated that Arena Commander does exist within the canon of the Star Citizen universe. So there is already a chance for a TV show style, broadcast competitive Arena Commander.
Sponsored by
system.
Original Systems.
Sponsored by Original Systems. So I have no doubt that we will see that in the game. We'll see, official Arena Commander ladder systems. We'll see definitely in the racing circuit. I mean, that always reminds me of that episode of Stargate SG-1 where they had the big sort of race and Sam Carter had to come on board as the special human engineer because no one thinks quite like a human. And, you could have interesting things where the race isn't just a matter of speed, but, when do you sacrifice your shields from speed? Maybe there are drones that will, race around and attack you at certain parts of the course, or maybe parts of the course is hazardous, or maybe, there is a part that goes through pirate-occupied territory. We don't know. These are all interesting things that can certainly be explored in that. But there's also a third type of competitive play that I'd really like to see, and it's something that I haven't seen done well before. And in fact, I've only seen it done before one time, and that was with Hellgate London, which is, a kind of an out left field game that most people haven't either heard of or certainly haven't played. It didn't last long. In fact, Hellgate London coined the term flagshipped, which is when a company completely cocks everything up and then sinks like the Titanic. They get flagshipped.
I love that.
In fact, in the first couple of months of the game launching, the community manager got sacked. The CEO he's lost his position. It was a whole, man, it was a snafu to all. Every letter of that word counts. And so the interesting thing that they had was a dungeon type that was released towards the final death throes of the game, where you had it was almost like a horde mode, but the opposite of horde mode.
Wait, what?
So yeah,
You
right?
were the horde?
You were kind of the horde. So what happened? They had this area called the Wilds. And the Wilds was this completely untamed, procedurally generated dungeon. And from how I remember it, and I might be remembering it slightly incorrectly, but if I do, it's a rosy sort of remembrance. I'm pretty sure it was endless. I'm pretty sure there was no end to it. And the goal was to see how far into the wilds you could get. And that was a really, really interesting game type where you would get a group of,
Oh, so
4
instead of the
people.
horde coming to you, you're going to them.
Yeah,
That's
it's
what you mean.
how far you could penetrate into their defenses, I guess, is the key term there. So what you would do is, as you would get further and further in, it would get more and more difficult. But to get into the wilds, you actually had to complete a series of dungeons to unlock tokens, and those tokens could only be spent once to enter the wilds one time. So there was this interesting sort of, play between playing the game to unlock the right to get into this special dungeon, and then once you did, you only had the one chance to get as far into it as possible, and if you screwed it up, too bad. You have to go and earn those tokens again. But I think that game type could really, really easily apply to something like Star Citizen. We've already got these worlds where, for example, the Vandal territory, where no UBE citizens go, because it's a death sentence, right? So I would see there would be a really interesting ability or a concept for a type of competitive play where you could go in and see how far you could reach into this enemy-occupied
That could be
planet.
like the pirate sport. Like the pirate blood
Exactly.
sport.
This is
You
a
get
pirate blood
You
sport.
get essentially like like racing pilots or pilots of some kind that sign up, and whoever gets the furthest, like their family gets a bunch of like the prize money or something, but they are all gonna die.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
Well, maybe there is like this apocryphal story of the guy that did survive it, or the guy that got to a certain point and got back out again. Maybe it's not even a case of you facing certain death, but it's like a game of chicken essentially. It's how
We've
far
placed a
you can get in.
transponder deep in Vandal territory. Whoever can get there and retrieve
Who
it.
even needs to place transponders? Maybe you're trying to get information downloaded off one of those giant machine recycle cruncher creepy things.
Yeah, or just to
that are down on
recover
the planet's
anything.
surface.
Recover anything that hasn't been recovered before. And so it's how far you can get in before you, chicken out and pull back. And then you do have to pull out and pull back and sort of exfiltrate from that successfully.
Man,
I think that would be
this
a really
is
interesting
writing
concept.
itself. This could be one of those articles in the stories on the thing, and the guy is trying to get in, and then suddenly his ship starts broadcasting on the Vandal channels, and it turns out he's been sabotaged by one of the other racers, and he has to hide in an asteroid. Man, this is awesome. Let's do it. Okay, never mind. Pulling back.
Yeah, no, I'd do it. I'd play.
All right, so Gray, speaking of Arena Commander, what kind of features are needed to support competitive play? So let's sort of take this in two chunks. Let's talk about sort of the ladder system, which we know they're going to have some kind of ladder, because they already mentioned that. And then let's talk about supporting the team-based, tournament or league system that we would imagine for other games. Or actually, okay, go ahead. I'm going to talk about the two different kinds of ladders, I think. But what kind of features will we need for competitive play?
The first one's relatively obvious. You do need a ladder, and there have been so many people who've managed to screw up ladders over the course of the past even 5 years that they have plenty of things to learn from without making those mistakes themselves, which is reassuring to see. But beyond that, the interesting question is going to be how they actually handle team composition and balance. Will they be sticking anybody who wants to do Arena Commander, let's say, beyond this alpha stage, which, let's be honest, for testing, that's the point. Beyond alpha, is everyone going to be in a stock fighter? Are you not going to be able to use your little tweaks with power that you would normally have? Will players be able to keep their macros that say, we'll put 80% of my power into shields on the Hornet in the front specifically? Where is that line going to be for balance? And I think that's going to be the big thing they need to figure out. what makes it an arena rather than a ships blow each other up testing ground?
That's a really good question. It's one that's been brought up in the past, and we haven't really had an answer from CIG yet. But the question is, I mean, a lot of these ships are balanced based on their abilities in the persistent universe for things other than fighting in an arena. So the question is, if the freelancer's good because it's multi-role, but in an arena it loses to a Hornet, but it's cheaper in the real world, which is another reason they don't have to insure it for as much. So, that's really a good question. I can only imagine they're going to have some kind of points system.
And it means that certain ships, just due to the cost, when they say something's a starter ship versus it's a space superiority fighter, the starter ships probably should lose. And that's not a normal thing for arena combat. You normally don't say, let's jam in two things and one of them is guaranteed to beat the other in every
right.
situation. That's really not what one normally associates with arena, so much as they associate with your buddy in World of Tanks bringing their Tier 1 tank into a Tier 10 battle. I think the question may be a lot about the point system, like what you were saying there. Say a Hornet's worth 5, and you have to have 3 players on a team, and your maximum score can be 10.
Well, I could see them even tweaking it based on... I mean, this would be for a competitive team mode, where the team sort of agrees, we've got 5 people, we've got 100 points, how are we going to divvy this up? That would be a really interesting strategic challenge. That would really spice up competitive play, unless, of course, there's some broken combination where it's just like, get 2 constellations and pack them with the strongest lasers and shields possible, and it's just unbeatable. Like, obviously you don't want that to be the case, but, at least with a point system, it's really easy to just say, okay, that is clearly a very strong thing, just bump up the points and make it cost more to try and balance it.
And the other thing is, there does need to be support for some modes. As much as I like the idea of slam into each other and blow each other up classic arena style, CIG is going to have to get creative. And I know they've talked about capture the flag as a possible thing. We've seen King of the Hill implemented already through Star Conflict, so if they kind of want to follow that beacon capture model, I'm sure they could. Which is even more interesting in Star Citizen because potentially it means you're standing still, and that's kind of a death sentence. But beyond that, I think it might be interesting to see them take some of the persistent universe things and make those into arena modes. Things along the lines of Escort the Transport, where you have a 5-player team, and 2 of them have to be in a freelancer, and 3 of them are running escorts.
Or
and you're going to be up
even
against
less restrictive
5
than that.
people.
You have to carry X amount of cargo. You can do it in whatever ship you want,
Sure.
But the small dogfighters won't be able to carry it.
Exactly. Make it so there's some mirroring on this. So you have to be able to carry X amount of cargo from point A to point B. And if all of your dogfighters went from point A to point B, you wouldn't be able to succeed. Things like this where you're going to have creative play, and you're going to have to bring some of those ships in that are purposely made to suck at dogfighting. But make them a part of that arena mode. Say, oh yeah, you can bring in your freelancer or your Banu merchantman or whatever it is. Figure it's a pretty big team size for this kind of event. Or maybe you have varied team sizes. Say you can have 2 players or 3 players, and between your 3 players, you could have 3 ships if you want to. But hey, you're not going to have a tail gunner.
Tim,
yeah, totally.
What do you think the importance is for features like replays or spectator modes for a competitive scene to emerge?
So totally. I mean, totally important. It's one thing to view it through the eyes of the people who are playing, but there is this very strong disconnect that you get when you're watching somebody else play a game. One of the things you see is that a game runs much slower in your brain when you're watching somebody else play than when you're playing it yourself. There is a finite amount of brain bandwidth, essentially. And
Need
there's
another
also
thread. Thread.sleep. Thread.sleep.
Yeah, pretty much. But the really interesting thing is that you also have these other bizarre mechanisms that happen in the body that don't rely on that bandwidth. There are autonomous systems as well. For example, the average reflex, your average human reflex is about, I mean, what, 20 milliseconds, something in that sort of
Somewhere
range.
You
there.
mean like when I
Depending-
bang my funny bone and scream ouch?
Well, no, see, the funny bone, funnily enough,
A full 2 seconds
is
later.
not. That doesn't originally go to the brain, and that's why when you tap your elbow or your knee, when the doctor taps it, the reason they're checking that is they're checking an autonomous reflex, which doesn't go to the brain at all. It's completely self-regulated within the spinal cord.
Oh, yeah, so the
and-
pain is just imaginary. Is that what you're saying? You're saying I'm crazy?
No, the pain arrives after the reaction, is
I
the
see.
point. And so when you're playing a video game, your reaction time might be, 20 milliseconds. However, the time it takes for an electric signal to go from the brain to the fingertip is closer to 200 milliseconds. That's an order of magnitude difference.
That's way
So
too
how
much
is it?
lag. That's
Well,
horrible.
it is. How is that even possible? How is it possible that your brain is reacting to something within 20 milliseconds, and yet it's physically impossible? Like, there's some bizarre light speed travel problem here, surely. But the point is that there are these autonomous systems in the body that speed things up.
Muscle
that
memory
don't rely
is
on
what
your brain.
sort of the colloquial name for it, right?
Yeah. So when you're watching someone play a game, you don't have that going on, which means you've got this 20 millisecond brain reflex thing going on, so everything that's happening on screen almost feels an order of magnitude slower than when you're playing it in real life. And that's why a lot of the people who are complaining on the forums about, oh, it's too arcadey, it's because you don't have your hands on the controls. It feels slow and arcadey because you're watching somebody else play.
But
And so
it
you
will
really-
destroy you.
Yeah, but when you're actually playing, it's very different. So when you're doing things like competitive modes, you need a spectator mode that is capable of viewing it at an audience's perspective, essentially. Something that allows you to see a greater field of view, something that's not quite so narrow in focus, and I mean that both metaphorically and literally. You need a wider field of view.
Almost like a
you also-
holodeck that people could sort of pinch and zoom, like Google Maps style, 3D rotate the just to watch the battle from any
Yeah.
direction.
You also need to be able to do things like you need to slew and rotate around something as it's happening. You don't necessarily want the camera's vector to match that of the ship's vector, otherwise you feel artificially constrained, and it's kind of boring to watch. I mean, there are so many interesting things you can do here, and I would really, I mean, if SIG are actually listening, I would really recommend having a look at the World in Conflict style of doing this, because it had such an interesting concept in being able to use, for example, setting up multiple scenes simultaneously and switching between virtual cameras on the fly when you're in the spectator mode. I mean, that was such a huge part of the spectator mode that made it really interesting to watch. Being able to view it from angles that aren't normally possible from the view of the cockpit. And the other game that does it really well, I personally think, is Guns of Icarus, where you've got a spectator mode that has extra HUD elements that aren't available to the person in the first-person view. For example, the spectator mode HUD allows you to see hits on both sides of the team, so you can tell when anyone is getting hit, not just the person who is being hit. But you can also tell things like, whose engine is on fire and which engine is on fire. So if you say, well, hey, these guys are using Banshee rounds with incendiary, and that's causing a huge amount of fire on the opposite team, that's not something you can tell when you're playing the game yourself. So it allows the spectator to see things from a different point of view, allows them to sort of take what's happening in somebody else's game and apply it in an interesting way to their game later on, which feeds into itself. The competitive mode actually feeds into itself, so you've got the spectators wanting to play the game competitively and the competitive people wanting to spectate, because it allows this other side of the view that you wouldn't get otherwise.
Really,
Absolutely.
really good point. One of the things I love about doing this show live is we get some really good questions from the chat. In the Twitch TV chat, Gwildar says, why couldn't you have sponsored competitions with preloaded ships so that each team is balanced with the same equipment? And the answer to that, of course, is that you could. But that takes away
Exactly.
a huge chunk of what makes Star Citizen interesting to a lot of people, specifically the customization options. And
But you don't have to choose one or the other, is the point.
Right.
I mean,
You could
can
have both.
different categories.
Yeah.
Well, it's also possible that when you're talking about the customizable ships, the things that are absolutely not the standard loadouts, not just vanilla across the board, there may still be banned equipment. In fact, I really hope there needs to be banned equipment, because I want things in the persistent universe that are totally unbalanced on an arena scale. Things that on an arena scale would completely break
but are
the
really
game.
difficult to get, so when you die and lose it, you're not going to be able to get it easily again.
Well, of course, or that generally in a larger scale than you see in an arena might be completely balanced. I just don't want to see Star Citizen have the same problems as many other MMOs where they balance their game around the arena. They need to make the arena a more limited version of the persistent universe itself.
Absolutely. I mean, I would love to see a scandal where someone gets found by using contraband equipment in an arena. And that'd be fantastic to find out that they've got like a secretly black market overclocked thing that's rebranded as something else.
Which would be really weird,
really
right? Because you're in a game within a game, so the arena is a simulated environment, yet somehow they smuggled like black market goods into the code is really what took place.
Yeah, I mean, it allows for some really interesting things. Also, the fact that, so like you were saying, you could have branded arena modes where you could get like, an Origin Systems, or even better than, a ship brand, you might have an Omniski branded one, where everyone in the arena mode uses a brand new Omniski prototype that's not been used before in the open universe.
Hell, you could have crazy mutator tournaments where it's like Joker only equipment. Let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. But you could also even have things like the equivalent of closed deck or sealed deck tournaments in Magic, where you've got a brand new ship that's never been used before, and you have no idea how it's going to behave or handle. I mean, those are some interesting concepts as well.
The first time a new ship rolls off the assembly line, they give it to the team to say, have a 5-on-5, let's see what happens. And everybody, how many people would be watching that just to see how the new ship performs? Like, nobody's seen it before.
You would get numbers through the roof.
That's brilliant.
Or even better, randomized equipment. Randomized ships. You don't know what you're going into. You might have never flown a Constellation before. You've only ever flown an Aurora, and you're like, what do all these buttons do? I don't know.
Is this station for science?
Why are there 6 pedals and only 2 directions?
There's a lot of potential out there for game modes. I do like what you're talking about before with the escort the cargo from one side to the other. That could easily be how much of it makes it there, or barring it actually making it, how far did it get before you lost it. I could also see that's like a blockade runner mode, right? I could also see but one side plays the defenders of a convoy that's all NPCs, and then the other side plays the attackers, and then they switch sides, and whoever was able to, get away with the most cargo as the attackers wins or something. And it would have to be sort of slanted so that one side is always going to be victorious. Otherwise, it's really difficult to try and balance that, asymmetrical game mode. But it could easily be done.
I have another really interesting game mode that I just thought of now, and I'm actually super excited about this. What about a game mode of essentially policing? So imagine you have a convoy of ships.
Mod style?
Yeah, well, so imagine you have a convoy of ships going from point A to point B. But imagine that in the arena mode, that convoy is essentially endless, right? You have ships going from
because they're digital,
point A,
so you can make it
point
endless.
B. Yeah, so they despawn and respawn from one into the other, and the one person has to join the convoy surreptitiously at some point and get to the other end, while the other team has to try and use scanning software and sort of, looking at the behavior of the ships to figure out which one is the real person. I think of almost a
that
spy
sounds like
party
Assassin's
style
Creed, right?
Assassin's
had that
Creed
mode.
Or Spy Party, where you've got one team is using their equipment to try and find the person, and this one lone wolf is just trying to get from point A to point B very surreptitiously with maybe, let's say an illicit cargo. It's like a smuggling thing, where they have to get to point A to point B.
Yeah, Smuggler's Run or something. That would be cool. All I can say right now is CIG, you're welcome for all these golden ideas.
All free.
We just did all your work for you. At least all the easy work.
Yeah.
Go ahead and make that happen.
We'll let you do the coding.
Program that terribly balanced idea. We're all over this.
Now, it occurs to me that there's a couple different ways to do a ladder system within any competitive game, including Star Citizen. Now, the typical ladder that people think of these days is the one that you find in most MOBAs and other MOBA-style games, which is the ELO ladder, right? The ELO ladder, where you play a game, and if you win, you get some more points, and that puts you slightly higher on the ladder, and you're just ranked based on your skill rating. There was another ladder used back in the day of competitive. It was the OGL ladder. I think it was called Open Gaming Ladder is what it was called. OGL used a ladder system whereby you take your 20, 25 teams or what have you in a given division, and they are ranked from 1 to 25. In order to move up the ladder, you have to challenge somebody above you to a match. If you win the match, you take their spot, they shift down one, and everybody else shifts down one until your spot has been reached. And that ladder kind of has its flaws, but it's an interesting and fun system in some respects. I kind of like it from a nostalgic point of view, but maybe it's not as good as a league or a tournament.
This system has actually been effectively in play in another game that I played competitively much more recently, come to think of it, World of Tanks, made by Wargaming.
Oh, they have a challenge ladder.
Their ladder is set up, it's team challenges, and the way that who's above you, so to speak, is determined is how much territory the person owns and if they are adjacent to you. So in order to enter the map and own territory on said map, first you have to go through a landing phase where you fight the other teams, and it's like a best of 3 type of thing. And then whoever wins out of that whole bracket system that they set up, trying to land on the mainland, gets to fight the owner of that particular mainland territory. And lo and behold, if you manage to land and you manage to beat those people in one round, and big winner takes all, then you get to move in there, and they get kicked out of that territory. Now, if they don't have any territory, you just kicked them off the map. But you may have just taken one of their many territories on said Europe map. Yeah, I've got it there on screen now. Now, the idea behind this is that who's the best is determined by who controls the most territory, and territory has varying values. But to get back around to the point, this challenge system has been incredibly successful for wargaming. The only thing that it's really a bother about, and the reason I actually stopped doing it, is because you have to have set times. You have to be able to say people will be challenging you at exactly 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time if they have registered by 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time the previous day, or some time the previous day. You have to give people warning. The warning has to be short enough that it's, not a snooze fest and nobody moves on the rankings. But at the same time, you have to give people enough notice that they can say, well, I can't make it to this. I can't do that time and date. Can somebody fill in for me, or can my team fill in for me, or that kind of thing. So for individual challenges, one-on-one, not the best system. But for 3-on-3, 2-on-2, whatever it is, or higher, so long as the teams have enough members and the expected times, every other day or whatever it happens to be, are inclusive enough, you could very well have this challenge system set up for teams. It wouldn't be to take territory, it would be to take, positioning on the ranks and the boards and that kind of thing. But the point stands, you could have a functional challenge system. It's currently being done in an automated way.
Yeah, I think the reason that the challenge system that I described kind of fell out of favor, and not only that, the league system that, CEVO and Cal and those player-run tournaments went with is because exactly what you're saying, the whole scheduling thing, because back in the day, we're going to go back in the day again, the majority of all competitive gamers were high school or college kids. They always had Monday nights available and Tuesday nights available and Wednesday nights available, and those people have all grown up and got kids and jobs now. They can't have...
Whoa.
You said the K word, Bridger.
I mean, they have lives now.
The J word.
The J word. Yeah, so I think that's the reason it's really fallen out of favor. You have to get basically the entire gaming community. You have to get them all to say they're available every Monday night is match night or Sunday night or what have you. And people who don't have that night available they don't get to play with you. Like that's very restrictive in comparison to a play who's ever available right now, and you'll go up or down the ladder based on your elo, which is the sort of current ladder system rather than a challenge ladder.
It most certainly is a lot less inclusive. But when you're talking about something where there's a lot more to lose, perhaps by losing a rank, then this could be a situation where the challenge is appropriate, where the ladder ELO system is less so. I agree with you, though. I think that games like League of Legends, where you can just go play ranked whenever you friggin' want to, and you go up or you go down depending on the game goes, yeah, that's about as inclusive as you can possibly get.
Now, bringing that back to Star Citizen, one of the problems with the League of Legends style ranked matches is that if you don't have a critical mass of players, it takes too long to get into a match, and then once you do, the teams are unbalanced because there wasn't enough people to properly match you. But when you have millions and millions of people playing in, like, League's example, you get almost a perfectly balanced match every time. Now, the trolls on my team this afternoon would suggest that that's not true, but I know that mathematically it did have the proper elo matching you up. So that's
if
another
we're
thing
talking
to consider.
math, 60% of League players are trolls anyway.
Right,
so.
of course. And they're never me. And they're always on my team, never on the enemy team. So the question is, for Star Citizen, is there going to be a critical mass of people willing to play ranked matches that will make a matchmaking system like that work? And next, will they be able to divide people up into enough sort of skill groups to make it make sense?
But yes, there is a critical mass that you need. I mean, every system requires a critical mass. I guess the question is just how big that critical mass is. And unfortunately, it's going to be big.
I'm saying, will Star Citizen have that? Like, will they be able to come up with that many players for competitive gaming in order to make it work?
Yes, I think it's a tweaking question. If it starts off and you only have 100,000 people that are interested in the really, really competitive version of it, it's CIG's job to figure out what's their matchmaking algorithm. How many players do they have? What's the distribution? That's a statistics problem. And how likely is a player that's 200 ELO higher than some other player? How likely is it that they're going to lose to the lower ranked player? And if they find out that there's a really extreme differentiation with a few hundred rank points, obviously they're going to have to start setting up more walls about, we're not going to match these people. We're going to make them wait. But if there's a lot more fluidity over the course of the whole thing, and if you give somebody the ability to say, well, I'm going to play, let's go to the League example, copper versus silver, or whatever it is, you may end up actually, or bronze versus silver, you may end up seeing a bronze person beat the crap out of a silver player, or a silver player being terrible and losing to a bronze player. In those situations, the differentiation is purely, to use the technical term, EPEAM. But when you're talking about actually dealing with how likely are players to have a chance against each other, the fact is, there's a lot of leeway in matchmaking so long as they're not saying the absolute top of the ladder is A-OK getting matched against the bottom of the ladder. Top to middle, there probably should be somewhere at least in that quartile that you can start making those divisions or making it less probable to match with that person. But matchmaking speed, particularly for new players, is going to be paramount and perhaps much, much more important than matchmaking quality to start.
So, that, man, there's so many interesting things to discuss on here. The next thing I think we can jump to, there's often, well, let me put it this way. I'm playing League of Legends in ranked matches, and somebody calls me a tryhard. Now, I'm pretty sure he was trying to be disparaging. He was trying to make fun of me or make me feel bad about myself. But I'm in a ranked match, and he's saying, you're playing to win. How stupid. I don't get it. But it's.
I'm happy you don't get that, Bridger.
Win in, like, every single game.
Theoretically,
ever.
right?
All the time.
Or hypothetically.
See, what Bridger was experiencing there is what we call Bronze League brain rot.
But what I wanted to bring that back to is there is a sort of dislike within the competitive within the gaming community against competitive players. They are seen to in many ways like ruin games because they find, you know, the best way to do something or what have you. Do you think we'll see that in the Star Citizen community, or is it more mature than that?
Oh, there's going to be
squeaky
plenty of
wheels
people
everywhere.
Yeah.
Squeaky wheels
No question.
everywhere.
There's going to be, for every one person who's decent at what they do, there'll be two people who want to complain about it. That's just kind of a given on the internet, right?
So,
Yeah.
then, of course, there's also the question of, in many games, the game balance is best served by balancing it to competitive play. So League is a perfect example. If just take a random champion that I'm not actually saying this is the case, I'm just saying for the sake of argument, let's say Lee Sin in the hands of a noob is terrible. Noobs can't figure out how to play him. He dies all the time. Nobody ever plays him. But in the hands of a really good player, he can be played really well. Now, if you balance for the lower skilled end of the spectrum, then he's going to be way too strong in competitive games. But if you balance him for the competitive game because he's got a high skill ceiling, then he's very hard for a new player to play. Like that, usually, most people tend to say, yeah, you balance for competitive play because people always get better over time. Now but that's a hope, I guess. So that as they play more and get better, the balance will appear to get better as they play. Does that make sense? Is that something that you're going to see in Star Citizen? Or are people going to say, no, it's the persistent universes where we need to balance first? Because that's the only thing I play with. Stop balancing the game around this arena thing I never take time to play.
I think it's important to make a differentiation here. When we talk about balancing the game, you can balance arenas. You can balance arena modes by tweaking persistent universe things. The important thing to note is that everyone will be in the persistent universe. Only a percentage will be in arenas. It's very easy to say, let's make the persistent universe functional, particularly with such a huge economy and a lot riding on the persistent universe being desirable to play in, and still have a differently balanced arena mode. Your laser might do a bajillion damage in the persistent universe, and in arena mode, they might make sure that you can't use that weapon. They might say that in arena, you will be issued this set of weapons that make it into a place where high-level players can do well. And high-level would be playstyle, not pull the trigger once and have somebody explode.
Good point. So let's see. Anything else that I'm missing here? We're coming up on a little bit over an hour, so we've got a good amount of time here. Anything else that you guys think we missed when it comes to competitive play? Anybody in the chat think there's some other question we need to wrestle around here before we move on?
Well, while we're waiting for chat, I just want to reiterate that I think the most interesting competitive play comes from asymmetrical systems. I really, really hope that Arena Commander, once PU is live, when Arena Commander is competitive, I really, really hope that they allow for highly asymmetric play, because that's where the fun is.
You and David Serlin, man. David Serlin's huge fan of asymmetric play to the point where he went out and made his own rules to chess, which he calls Chess 2, that has different armies.
I was just going to bring up Chess 2. So, okay, I'm first of all also a big Dave Serlin fan. Chess 2 is amazing. If you actually look at the game chess, the big problem with chess is that at high level play, and we're talking grandmaster level play, probably about 60% of games end up in a stalemate, or the other 40%, you know who has won way before the game is finished, and that's essentially it's bad design. It's the first identifier of a badly designed game. Now, giving chess a break, it's old. It's really, really old. But when you compare something like, you can compare chess to Go, the Chinese, what I guess people sometimes call Chinese chess, which is really disparaging to the game, because it's a really, really good game. Go has far more permutations, and they still haven't actually built computers that can beat the grandmasters in Go as well. So, but the point with all these games is that both teams are starting from an absolutely identical and equal footing. with the exception, I guess, in these turn-based games of who goes first. The big problem with that is that when you have identical footings, you have this bizarre symmetry which fights against itself. So it's almost like, Lenz's law in electrodynamics. You've got this one thing pushing one way, which creates a backwards force which pushes back against it, which creates this backwards force, and the other thing which pushes back. And so you get this sort of bizarre back and forth that just doesn't really go anywhere. Once you start introducing asymmetric systems, that's when you have really interesting play dynamics that make things feel interesting and new, and more importantly, they make it feel dynamic, like it's actually evolving in front of your eyes. And that is what is the most interesting things to view are, because they feel natural. And natural, obviously, to human brains is good. So if you look at games like, TF2 is one good example, because they do have some pretty big differences between the classes. Another game, really out of, again, left field, was a board game called Twilight Imperium, where each of the games that you play... Yeah, so we've encountered Twilight Imperium before. The game that takes 16 hours to set up and 14 hours to play the first turn.
Not when you let your engineer friend set it up for you at his immaculate place with all of his extra modded
to have one of those friends. So the point of that game is that every single one of the races is completely asymmetric. Some of them have different rules. They follow a completely different rule set. And these are some of the most interesting games that you get, because you have systems where you just cannot predict what is going to happen next. And no two opponents are going to feel the same. So all these matches are going to feel vastly, vastly different because of these small changes in the two different sides. And the bigger you make those changes, the more interesting the games start to become.
Yeah, but then, of course, you've got the problem of trying to balance the game. The more different it gets, the more difficult it gets to balance. So
right, but a balance should always be an ongoing thing.
Right.
No game is ultimately balanced. You should always be having these emergent systems coming out that you have to respond to. That is 90% of the game. Is the play back and forth between the rules. And I would love to see systems where, a particular combination is found to be really good, and so not so much that that combination is nerfed, but maybe tweak the dynamics a little bit, change the way things work a little bit to make other systems seem interesting in comparison, to be able to respond to that dynamic.
Wow. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at chess 2.
It's nuts. It is so good.
Two kings.
You lost him at chess 2 5 minutes ago.
You have no queen, but instead have two kings called warrior kings. If either one is checkmated, you lose. And then they can move and capture the same way as a regular king, though it also has the option of doing a whirlwind attack. It destroys everything in the 8 spaces surrounding it, including friendly pieces. And it always, after every turn you may optionally take a second king turn where you move a warrior king or perform its whirlwind attack. That's amazing.
Oh my god.
Right, and on the surface, that seems super overpowered, right? You're like, well, hang on, how can one piece take out 8 pieces? That's not fair. But the point is, it changes the way the system is played. So all of a sudden, you don't want to be getting your pieces right up in his grill, because he's going to take you out. You want to do things from a distance. You want to change the way that you're responding to that. So no one thing is really overpowered. It just changes the way you need to respond to it.
Yes. Oh, there's some cool stuff. The Reaper. Okay, I'm going to stop reading these, because then we're going to turn into a chess 2 discussion. What the heck are we talking about?
We're just wrapping up on our last bit here with
asymmetric play. No, let's jump back to asymmetric play, and this could actually tie right into Star Citizen, because I submit that one of the best competitive game modes was created back in the day and was really popularized in Return to Castle Wolfenstein, but it existed as Assault in the original Unreal Tournament, and that's the stopwatch mode. That's where one team is the attacker, one team is the defender, and the attacker has to accomplish some objective within a time frame, and then after the match is over, the defender now has to accomplish, this team switch sides, and now the new attacker has to accomplish and whoever accomplishes the objective fastest wins. Now this game mode is extra good from a design perspective if you also implement something whereby over time the attacker gets more and more advantages. In an FPS, for example, this might be the spawn times for the attacker get lower and lower as the game goes on, and the defenders get higher and higher to make it so the attacker has to win eventually. And that way you have a guaranteed way of judging who wins, who does the objective fastest. Unfortunately, in some games like Return to Castle Wolfenstein, the attackers would get shut out, and then they would switch sides, and the attackers would get shut out. And how do you determine who won? You can't, because there's no longer a reference. So that's the problem. That's why I favor the changing conditions, sort of forcing the attackers to eventually win mode, and it's really all about how fast you can do it. And that would work so well in Star Citizen for the same reason. Like if you have these sort of an Alamo style, like the defenders have to defend some space station from incoming attackers, and the attackers are more like a horde of, you could even have them in like Vandal ships, or you could have them, be a faction of UE, like in universe, whatever, that are attacking. And they're getting more and more reinforcements, so their spawn timers go down and down, and the defenders are getting less and less, but the defenders start with like bigger ships with bigger guns, and so they're kind of like holding out against the swarm. Like that would be such a cool game mode, and it's who can get to the other guy and destroy the space station in the fastest time. Like, that would work so well.
Yeah, so there's another really cool game mode in Guns of Icarus where it's they call it the Crazy King. So it's essentially King of the Hill, but the hill moves.
What?
And it doesn't move, so the hill doesn't move linearly.
Huh.
It just changes position instantaneously after a fixed amount of time. And that could be really, really interestingly done in something like Star Citizen, because if you have asynchronous and asymmetric play, if you have one team that has a really good tanking ship that is great at defending, like for example, you've got like a Retaliator or something, it's got your 5 turrets and whatnot, it's really good at point defense. It might not be the fastest ship, and if the point that you're defending suddenly changes position, the team with the fastest ships is now going to race over to the new point, grab it, and their clock starts ticking down. And so you've got to wait for the big point defense ships to start to sort of ponderously get their way over there. So now it's a question of, do I have lots of quick ships that can easily and agilely get between points? Or do I have some heavy ships that can hold the point for the longest time while they're there and just hope that I can get to the next point ahead of time? Or do I have a combination of the two? And then it's also a question of, like, for example, in Guns of Icarus, if people haven't played that game, you really, really should. It's airships. It's steampunk airship combat. I mean, it's got really, really good team dynamics. And the team system is something I would love to see in Star Citizen as well, where you've got engineers who are trying to fix things, you've got gunners that are trying to shoot things, and a pilot that's just trying to keep the ship moving in the right direction.
The devs have actually said that their capital ship gameplay, they're trying to essentially take cues from Guns of Icarus and make it feel, similar to that, but with a spacey theme.
Yeah, exactly. So now you've got a question of, if I'm piloting the big heavy galleon ship, at what point do I abandon the point to go to the next point? Like, if you think you know where the next point is going to be, at what point do you abandon that point and let the enemy take it back to score their measly 2 or 3 points, when you have the advantage because you're already at the next point and can capture it immediately, so you might get the 10 points or the 20 points or however long it takes to grab the point or retake the point. So it introduces all these really interesting mechanics. And then you can go a step further and say, well, what if different points confer whoever owns the point certain advantages? Maybe even make there be multiple points simultaneously, but this point A, gives you 10% thruster bonus, whereas point B gives you, recharge in your shield time is lower, or your respawn time is lower. So
as much as I like this idea, Tim, I think we've got to close it down. Gray's got places to be. We've gone a little over time here, unfortunately, but
just a little.
We're going to stick around for a couple of minutes after we can talk more game modes and stuff, but I think we're going to end the official show here. Thanks, you guys, for showing up and for helping us out. I'm glad that we got the scheduling conflict fixed up. The next show we are going to have is going to be on the 25th of May, and that hopefully will be the day where we discuss our having played Arena Commander version 1. Cross your fingers. If it comes out, like if we get access to it that weekend, we might push the show back just so that we'd have something, some experiences to talk about.
Town. Woo!
Oh, will you be back for that week, or are we gonna find, or is Tim gonna be back here?
That week I will, but that weekend I'm out. So
okay. So yeah. We'll see. We'll probably see Gray then in a couple of weeks. But thanks, guys. Every other Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time is our normal recording. That is UTC -4 right now with Daylight Savings Time activated. And I think that is about it. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. We hope to see you very soon within the Arena Commander Alpha. I am Bridger, signing off. Whew. All right.
Alrighty.
Thanks, Gray. Sorry, I didn't realize we'd gone past the time.
Good stuff. I just have to bolt. Good recording with you guys. Good to see you again, Tim. Catch you soon.
All right,
yeah,
thank you very
man.
much. I didn't mean to cut you off, Tim. I just wanted to make sure that he didn't have to rush out before we close the show.
No, that's cool.
And
you gotta stop me. I'm like a freight train.
Dude, that's me too. I have to stop myself. I have like one part of my brain constantly keeping track and being like, "You're talking too long. You're talking too long. You're talking too long." It's louder and louder.
You're
over
still
time.
talking, for the love of God.
But listen, I just have this one more thing. No. If it was important, you would have said it early. I'm just looking at the other chess 2 things. Midline invasion, you win if you get your king across the midline, and like dueling when you fight a battle, that's amazing. Reaper.
Yeah, chess 2 is absolutely nuts.
I've never actually played his version of chess 2. I've played his other games on the FantasyStrike.com website.
Mm-hmm.
Although, doesn't he have Pandente coming out?
Yes.
That's a really interesting version as well. For those of you that thought Texas Hold'em Poker was really fun, but is missing, there's not enough bluffing, Pendente is probably where you want to go. That would be ideal. I don't know. They don't have it on here. I thought it was going to have an online version that would be available, but I'm not sure. Maybe I got to keep up on his website a little more. But there's a couple of David Serlin's games, actually all 3 that I know of on FantasyStrike.com, Yomi, Puzzle Strike, and Flash Duel, all of which are essentially card games and are really, really freaking cool. And you can play them for free. Go check it out. Serlin.net is his blog, and FantasyStrike.com is where you can play those games. I actually have all 3 of these games in physical form that I play with people. It's a lot of fun. Do you play any of these, Tim?
No, I have no friends.
Oh, you gotta come play Yomi. Yomi is like Street Fighter the card game. In fact, he built the game hoping he could get the Street Fighter license, but he was not able to. He was turned down, so he made his own universe instead.
Nice. Yeah. No, we have a board gaming group that gets together every now and then, but most of them are also back in my hometown in Perth.
Ugh,
so
I feel bad for you too, because I know board games in Australia are really expensive.
So expensive. It's like the Android Netrunner game over here is like $180
just to get like the base set that $40 in America.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's absolutely brutal. I mean, even my the D&D books that I've got, and my entire bookcase over there is just full of Dungeons and Dragons crap. I mean, we pay such a huge premium for those. The player's handbooks you rarely find for less than about 120. Like it's super nuts.
Yes, Mega Bear Trap, thank you. We are aware that we're still online. We usually have a small after show where we just kind of continue talking about stuff that didn't make it into the regular show because it's kind of off topic. For example, board games and D&D.
The price of D&D.
Yeah, no, I've heard some horror stories from other board gamers in Australia just because, there's not a big market down there, so it costs a lot more to ship games down there. Only the popular ones get down there on a regular basis, and Netrunner is incredibly popular here. I think it's rivaling Magic at the moment, and it so deserves it too.
Oh, man,
Asymmetric collectible card game that just has way...
I mean, if we're going to talk about asymmetric games, Netrunner is just, like, it's unbeatable.
The thing about Netrunner,
so good.
in compared to, like, Magic, is I always felt like in Magic, the 90% of the game takes place before you play. It's the building the deck, and then actually playing the game feels like you have a lot less impact than what's going on. Maybe I'm just inexperienced at Netrunner, because I've only played it about 10 times, but it feels to me like my decisions made while I'm playing the game affect the actual outcome a lot more than the decisions you make playing Magic.
Absolutely. I mean, I Magic frustrates me. Magic really, really frustrates me because so much of it is, how much money you have managed to drop into the game beforehand. It's the only way to sort of get anything that's worthwhile. Whereas the Netrunner allows you to have these sort of set decks that you don't have to spend a huge amount of money on, but
Ashlyn wanted to know what game takes hours to set up. Here you go. This is it.
Twilight Imperium.
Twilight Imperium. And this is a small game. This is 1, 2, 3, 4 players. You can play it with 6 or 8. It's ridiculous. And the thing is, it does such a damn good job of telling an awesome story. Yeah, Zendo says the only way to play Magic is to play draft mode, which is right. That's true. Draft is much more interesting because the decisions you make aren't so open-ended. Like when you just play standard tournament Magic, like they have a few cards banned, but basically the pool is as big as you can afford. And that is too big to contemplate, and if you have all the time in the world, you could sit there studying and finding the perfect everything, and then, then it's not fun because you don't have any restrictions. But when you play draft, you're like, here's a bunch of shit, make the best of it. Like, that is way more interesting to me than have access to all the best options and choose among them. Like, that's not... Oh, of course I've played Cosmic Encounter.
I also get really frustrated at the concept of the fact that you're with Booster Draft, you're essentially discounting a huge number of cards that were made for the game.
Yeah.
Like, you're artificially limiting yourself in the game that you have designed yourself. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. There's some crazy logic. There is some...
Well, Netrunner built a special deck of cards that's only used in draft, which is interesting. Yeah. But that means that to me, that sounds like what you do is you go to a draft tournament for Netrunner, and then you enter it, you get a bunch of cards, and you play with them, and then you promptly throw them away afterwards?
Yeah.
Is that really what you do? Because you can't use those in the standard constructed tournaments.
No, but I mean the thing is, you can make your own game modes with Netrunner. Like there's so much awesome you can do with it.
Now I love the concept of draft, and I might, if I had more time and money to throw into Netrunner. I've only just played it sort of friendly with one of my friends, but I'd love if I could find some place around here that did Netrunner tournaments. I'd totally get involved. I love the concept, the cyberpunk feel. Mega Bear Trap says Hangover Tales. Yes, this is like Hangover Tales. Netrunner, for those of you that don't know, let me see if I can find a good image that'll encapsulate what it looks like. It's a cyberpunk game. Let me see if I have like a play space. Well, maybe I can use this picture here. Kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. The way that Netrunner works is it takes place in a cyberpunk future where one person plays as the evil corporation that's doing some evil agenda to try to take over the world. If they accomplish their evil agenda, they win the game. The other side plays as the how would you put it? Sort of the hippy dippy,
the Netrunner.
the loose freedom and hackers on the internet that are trying to expose the evil corporation's agendas to the world, essentially. Shadowrun is a cyberpunk game. And the way that this works is the corporation sets up servers by putting face-down cards in front of them. And what they do is they protect these servers with ice. And ice is essentially like firewalls and other kind of things that are security, essentially blocking their servers. And the Netrunner player, the hacker, essentially, is trying to hack his way into these servers and reveal the agendas. And whoever gets to 7 agenda points first wins. Now, this sounds relatively straightforward, but there are a lot of different things that go into this. In order to bypass specific security, you might have to have enough money to pay for the right type of software to bypass it, and so you have to sort of save up some money before you make a run on a server, and then he might have some kind of trap set up on that server which springs and puts a tag on you, making him able to send goons after you to actually physically find you and beat you up and do some damage to you, and it's got a lot of cool components.
But there's even the bluff mechanic where you could be putting all these traps in front of a card that is actually entirely useless, and the valuable card is completely unguarded.
Yeah.
But because it doesn't have any guards on it, you assume that it's useless. I mean, there's so many meta levels of play that it's fantastic.
It really is. I need to play it some more, honestly. I got to get back to it and play it some more. So Netrunner is one of my recent favorites. I'm waiting for Pendente.
Yeah, it pretty much is Shadowrun. Like Sethium said, it pretty much just is Shadowrun.
Yeah, I guess you could do draft at home with your... You know what? Zendo brings up Hearthstone. Did you play Hearthstone yet?
Yeah, I'm playing Hearthstone. Not proud of it, but...
I was playing Hearthstone for a while until I got... I guess after about 10 or 20 matches, I realized that 3 or 4 of those matches came down to the heart of the cards, to put it in Yu-Gi-Oh style. So yeah. I would be at a situation where it's like, if I pull card X, I win. If I don't pull card X, I lose. It's like they're complete random luck. I pulled card X and I won the game. Like, yeah. I understand that decisions that I made up until that point did affect the outcome, but that happened... It felt like that happened far too many times. In addition, the choice I would make each turn felt obvious, I would say 70 to 75% of the time. I was never feeling like torn between two options. And I love it when a game, specifically strategy games or board games, will make me go, oh, I want to do both of these things, but I can't. Like, that's the sign of a good game. If they can put you in agony trying to decide between two different options, that's the sign of a good board game.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
Somebody did a search and got Netrunner OS a Linux flavor.
Actually, Netrunner OS is pretty cool. It's not hugely useful, but it's really fun.
I assume that has nothing to do with the brand of the board game or the card game. That's just completely that's a generic word in the cyberpunk universe is Netrunner.
Yeah.
Okay, but
it's a Gibson too, isn't it?
Steve Gibson?
William.
Oh, William Gibson. I don't know. It might be.
And on the topic of cyberpunk, a bit of a spoiler for a potential future episode. The next time that we talk, I should hopefully be a cyborg.
What? Are you gonna come and murder us? What do you mean?
What? No, cyborgs don't murder people.
Oh, tell that
Not
to
all
Doc
the time.
Ock. The evil AI in the computer might leak itself into your brain. We don't know. Best to be safe.
I've been following and been a periphery part of the grinder movement for a long time and the biohacking movement, and I finally managed to get a hold of some new implantable technology that I'm going to be putting inside my body in using backyard surgery, essentially.
Okay, so Deus Ex. Pre-Deus Ex.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I am implanting an near-field communication chip, programmable chip, into my hand, and doing the...
Is this like an RFID thing, essentially?
Kind of, yeah. It's a power vampiric NFC Type 2 plus chip.
You're gonna be a vampire too now. What?
A vampire cyborg. And I'm doing the magnet mod as well, but I'm doing it in a different way with a new type of magnet coating, which hopefully allows for a slightly different interaction between the nervous system and the magnet.
Okay. So, when is your eye going to start glowing red?
Oh man, the day I can replace my right eye is going to be a happy day.
All right.
I mean, that eye is useless.
I'm going to shut us down here so I can let my wife back in the bedroom. I, however, have good news. We have put an offer down on a house that was accepted, and we're now going through the motions. We got it inspected and some other stuff, so I'm going to have my very own studio for streaming and producing all kinds of awesome Star Citizen content in the near future, hopefully.
Nice.
So very, very excited about that. That's supposed to happen sometime in, it closes the end of June, and then we're going to be moving in July. So unfortunately, I'm hoping that I will have, some point in the 2-week break between 2 episodes, I'll be able to move everything over there and get the new studio set up. So that's my hope.
You can be like a real adult.
Yeah, I can be like a real old grown-up person, for reals. All right.
Yeah.
But for now, I am going to shut us down here so the wife can come back in and yell at me for taking too long. All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Enjoy your night, guys.
Have a good one.